Hey everyone, welcome to the Upstream Ag Insights audio video edition for the week of August 9th. My name is Shane Thomas. I have a few different things I wanted to touch on in this video edition this week. I think there's 15 or so total stories in the written version, but I'm going to highlight three that I think are the most interesting from the week. There's two really big announcements to start the week off, and so I'll touch on those initially. And so the first was FBN. They announced $250 million raised, bringing the valuation to about 1.75 billion now. So a true unicorn status, which is new or unique, I should say, in the ag space. There's only so many of them. When you look at who invested, there's a number of their old investors and some new ones, and one that stood out was BlackRock, one of the largest investors globally. They have, I think, $7+ trillion with a T in assets. So very significant investor and really focused on sustainability and that ESG type of investing lately as well. And so that's one of the reasons that it sounded like they were interested in FBN. And the CEO, Amal Deshpande, came out and said that there's no real initiative from FBN to get into the carbon space directly by that creating carbon markets, or maybe it's creating protocols. Not necessarily something that they're going to be focusing on, but they are looking to still support farmers in that space. They obviously see it being something that is going to move things forward in farming, be a significant component of farming in the future. And so, there's a number of different things that FBN can do today and probably will look to do more in the future. I touch on a couple of those. One just around their data processing and what they're capable of capturing and the insights they're capable of delivering from a sustainability perspective, whether it's tying into different calculators, different protocols to help give insight for farmers, whether it's making it easier to be able to collect that data as well. They obviously have their data component. They also have their crop inputs business, which when it comes to products, I think we'll start to hear a little bit more about that around which products are being used when it comes to the carbon side of things. So how sustainable is that? How or what products do you offer when it comes to the sustainability in the carbon space? So can FBN get into some of the regenerative seeds, so call it cover crop seeds? Can they offer some of that? Can they start to offer more biologicals, or can they start to source their active ingredients in a more sustainable way, call it a sustainable way, or call it formulated in a unique way as well? And so there's a couple of different angles there that they could actually build out some a product line or parts of their product line to better support farmers in that space. I think one of the quotes from an Ag Funder article that really stood out to me from their CEO as well was, I won't try and say exactly what he stated, but basically he said that other competitors are not really putting a dent into their business today. He also stated that there's more of a significant moat around their business today than people give them credit for. And I found that interesting for a couple of reasons. The first, from a no dent perspective, I wrote something in one of the first Upstream Ag Insights that referenced a Farm Journal survey, and these surveys are difficult to say how relevant they are and how accurate. There's obviously some flaws in referencing that sort of data, so I'll be the first to acknowledge that. But basically in 2018, Farm Journal did a survey of, I think it was somewhere around 500 or 600 farmers or something along those lines, just about e-commerce and what percentage had been looking to participate in the e-commerce space, what percentage did purchase in the e-commerce space. And that year, of the farmers that did purchase online and from an e-commerce perspective, 48% of them purchased from FBN. That was 2018. The 2019 edition of that same survey came out, and actually FBN had dropped to 30% of the customers had purchased from FBN. And so this isn't a market share analysis, this isn't super in-depth, but year over year, there was more competitors in that space, whether it's the AgVens, whether it's the commodity eggs, whether it's the Agrellis, those sorts of online options, or even Nutrien being in that space as well. And so when you look at dropping year over year from 48% of the customers that purchased online purchasing from you down to 30% the year after in 2018, that's a pretty significant drop. So there is a little bit of a dent, I guess, so to speak, at least from a e-commerce crop input perspective. They obviously have their marketing, they have the insurance, they have all those different areas. So those might be untouched, those might be something separate, but crop input business is being touched a little bit, it seems. That doesn't mean they're not still successful, doesn't mean that they haven't still grown significantly over that time, but I think it's worth noting. The other comment around moats, and this, without having a lot of good data around it, it's tough to really quantify and give real strong insights surrounding it. But when we think of moats, there's things like network effects, scale, switching costs, brands, all those sorts of things play into an economic moat, or what give a company a defense against competitors and help them compete against those competitors, support their customers better, all these sorts of things. And so I kind of go through those different types of moats and just question, where does FBN have a moat? And today, you look at brand maybe a little bit. You look at scale, maybe they're getting there in terms of having some moats there versus some other competitors. When you look at network effects, there might be something there. And basically that's when for every new farmer that comes into the FBN membership, another farmer that's already a member derives more value. And so when we start to think of things like data, when we start to think of things like the pricing components around getting AI at a better price from a scale perspective, there's probably some value there. So there might be a little bit of a moat coming into play for FBN, but today I think it remains to be seen that they have a very strong economic moat. But it's interesting. That quote didn't get in depth, but it's something that I'd love to hear more on, where exactly the FBN moat is today. So I thought that was interesting. And then I touch a little bit on their flywheel, but without dragging out the FBN component too much, I'll defer that to the actual newsletter. I'll touch quickly on Indigo. So they finished, or I guess call it topped up their Series F to 350 plus $1 million raise now, putting their valuation, at last I've read anyways, somewhere in that 3.5 billion to 4 billion. So pretty significant. Again, Ag Funder did a great job of covering some of this, getting some quotes and delivering a couple of comments. So it was great. And really David Perry touched on kind of their 5 components and touched on their strategy, which I think a lot of people were pretty familiar with, but he commented on how the agronomy side supports the regenerative ag, supporting the carbon, the microbials support the carbon, the trucking supports the entire drive to really change that landscape from a supply chain perspective. So everything kind of feeds into each other there. And I don't disagree with that. And I'll talk a little bit about the execution of that in a second, but where I think there's still some missing components there for them is really around the field-centric data, and actually having the data around what's going on in the field from an input perspective, from a crop yield perspective, whether all those different things are really truly missing from that when it comes to supporting their carbon initiatives, when it comes to supporting their trucking, when it comes to the traceability on that all is necessary to help support those different components. And so when they have these 5 separate segments, I think they almost need a 6th, or at least some components to fit into that. They have their TELUS Labs acquisition, which I believe probably touches on some of that, but doesn't necessarily capture that meaningful field-centric data. And so I question, or not even question, I suggest that maybe we'll be looking at an acquisition from them with some of those funds into a company that does specialize or have some of those different attributes or the capabilities to do some of that data capturing. So that's kind of interesting. I think Indigo, one quote from David Perry kind of cracked me up a little bit, but basically he says the hardest thing is execution, which is true, but I found it interesting that he highlighted that. I mean, you look at those 5 components, having any one of those specific business segments in and of itself, execution is hard, but to have them executed on effectively and seamlessly together in an integrated fashion is exceptionally challenging. I fully agree with that. He's done a lot of exceptional things in the past, so it'll be interesting to see how that execution goes. I think, when you start to look at the options for Indigo from a long-term perspective, are they going to be able to be acquired by somebody in the future? that's pretty high valuation at this point. IPO, I would love to see an IPO. I'd love to be able to read that S1 and some of their numbers and metrics. But I still think that's a far ways out. I don't know if they have nearly enough revenue to be able to go anywhere near that or have that business foundation laid yet. So interesting story this week with Indigo, interesting with FBN. Those are probably the two biggest ones. So I have a bunch of different commentary in Upstream around that. And then one that's just a passion of mine that I think stood out to me was Vive Crop Protection, a Canadian-based company that has unique technology when it comes to formulating products, so active ingredients, biologicals, fertilizers, all these things. They had an announcement around an investment last week, and this week they announced a partnership with Marrone Bio, a biological-based organization, and actually talked about how they are taking Regalia, I believe is the product, so a biological, and going to be formulating that with azoxystrobin, so one of the largest AIs globally from a fungicide perspective, co-formulate those together, which is enabled through some of the technology that Vive is doing. And to me, this is where I see the biological space really trending towards. I know I heard a lot in the past, well, are we ever going to get the biologicals? The synthetics just work so much better today. The reality is, they each have their strengths. There's a lot of benefits to the synthetics, obviously, but there's benefits to biologicals too. And really putting those two together is a really powerful strategy and a really powerful product initiative that can really help drive the uptake of some of these biologicals, get a real good benefit out of both the synthetic and the biological. And so I'm pretty excited to see that. That's the first product like that I'm aware of, specifically formulated with the Vive technology. So something that I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to. And I would imagine with Vive, we'll be seeing some more partnerships, announcements from a product perspective from them, and even some licensing agreements in the future. So exciting company, and I thought that was pretty cool this week. And with that, that was kind of my three favorite stories. I hope you enjoyed listening to my three favorite stories. If you want to see what else is going on in Upstream this week, I encourage you to go over to www.upstreamaginsights.substack.com, and you can check it out, and I look forward to hearing any feedback from everybody around it. Have a great week, everybody.